Hello, everyone. My name is Ines Katzenstein. I'm the director of the Cisneros Institute and curator of Latin American art at MoMA. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to the second part of the Aconcagua Summit, or Cumbre Aconcagua, an event that includes 3 online conversations and a closing forum in video format. The summit attempts to reflect through art on the future of Latin American waters. As I mentioned at the opening of the first session 2 weeks ago, this conference launches a series of research meetings we will be organizing as part of a 3-year initiative on the connections between art and the environment in contemporary Latin America. The aim of the project is to understand, to document, and to communicate the many ways visual artists in the region, in conjunction with researchers in other disciplines and activists, are grappling with different forms of environmental devastation, envisioning new ways of relating to nature, and engaging in actions to repair, rehabilitate, and care for the planet. The Aconcagua Summit, the research project's first conference, was conceived by Chilean curator Camila Marambio, who will also moderate each of the sessions of the event. We invited Camila because of her experience in constructing interdisciplinary dialogues on nature in a range of platforms and places, and because of her studies of the problem of extinction from the perspective of the Southern Cone. Her most ambitious project along those lines is called Ensayos, is online, and investigates Tierra del Fuego. The Aconcagua Summit proposes to reflect, then, on how water is appropriated, perceived, and debated in the Americas. But it will do so on the basis of the work of 3 women artists, Carolina Caicedo from Colombia, Cecilia Vicuña from Chile, and Maria Thereza Alves from Brazil. Distinguished theoreticians, historians, attorneys, and scientists will also take part in these conversations. We had originally planned to hold the Cumbre Aconcagua in the Aconcagua, in the highest mountain peak in South America, in April of this year. The idea was to organize encounters in places where the issues to be discussed are immediate and present concerns, and participants would then be invited to think on-site and to implicate themselves corporeally in the issues addressed. But as we all know, the COVID-19 crisis has changed everyone's plans. And after months of considering options, we reached the decision to hold the event in a virtual form. Before starting this second session, I would like to thank, on behalf of MoMA, to Maria Thereza Alves and Denise Ferreira da Silva, today's participants, for being online with us. I'm also very grateful to Camila Marambio for the remarkable work of the mind and of the spirit that she has done since the project began. Finally, I would like to thank Maria del Carmen Carrion from the Cisneros Institute for her work in organizing this event. Please take into account that at the end of the conversation, the participants will try to answer questions from the audience. Submit them via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And we hope that the participants will be able to answer most of them. Without further ado, I turn over to Maria Thereza, to Denise, and to Camila. And again, thank you for being with us today.
Gracias, Ines. And welcome to everyone who is out there today, tuning into the second session of the Aconcagua Summit. I see in the chat lots of names, friends, but also from many parts of the world. Cumbre Aconcagua is an oral ascent from far-flung corners of the Americas to the highest peak of the Andes Mountains. I call it a confabulatory relay between artists, philosophers, and scientists, all of who conspire with water, and in doing so, attempt to dismantle the extractivist mentality that objectifies life itself. digna rabia and moral hazard. The Colombian philosopher Ignacio Valledo introduced us to the idea of the Platonic break, a metabolic rupture between nature and culture that occurred more than 2,500 years ago. This European mindset traveled to the Americas with the first European colonists some 500 years ago, and still actively generates the conditions for the alienation and exploitation of the rivers, lakes, and glaciers of Abya and Turtle Island. The LA-based Colombian artist Carolina Caicedo orally initiated us in the ascent to the Cumbre by reading from her script One Body of Water, which connected us to the rivers of North and South America, specifically the Elwa, the Yuma, and the Yaqui. The bodies of these liquid beings has been severed by the construction of dams to appease the human overconsumption of hydroelectric power. And by showing us her ongoing visual research with the communities that love and live along those riverbeds, Carolina illustrated how the Western ideological separation between the world and the soul, nature culture, finds resistance in indigenous thought and artistic coalitions. Carolina and Ignacio's conversation is now available on MoMA's website with English subtitles. I urge you all to watch it if you didn't attend, because today's dialogue follows the current of the Yaqui River to the time back in Tenochtitlan, when the lake basin of Mexico was thriving. Tightly linked to the radical eco-visions presented by Caicedo and Valledo, today's two Brazilian confabulators, the philosopher Denise Ferreira da Silva and the artist Maria Thereza Alves, will speak to us and to each other about the return of the lake. Maria Thereza's multidisciplinary, multitemporal, ongoing, collaborative artwork through which she traces the legacies of early colonial entitlement and renders visible the devastating social, economic, and environmental effects caused by the European split between nature and culture. Maria Thereza, who is here with us today, finds herself on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, while Denise and I are on the coast of the Pacific Sea, though millions of miles away, or thousands at least. We're going to start our musings on El Robo, the theft, with a 3-minute excerpt from Denise Ferreira da Silva and Arjuna Newman's 2016 collaborative film essay, Serpent Rain, in which they eloquently articulate the effects of abstraction from the elemental. Let's watch this clip.
All your cells contain other cells, ancestors of previously free living cells. the human microbiome. Right? This is the big thing now in biology and certainly in parts of medicine. Because when something goes wrong and you become sick, is it you? Or is it the rainforest that lives on you?
In Serpent Rain, Denise unfolds, quote, a completely different notion of time, unquote, by asking us to look at the fossil inside of a rock. Denise says the living thing that was fossilized, the content, the material, its matter, now part of the rock itself, grafted, a reminder that that which has happened has not gone away. It is the time of the rock and the time of the fossil together. In 1979, I was with some friends in the countryside of Albuquerque in New Mexico. There was a Pueblo indigenous ruin. We decided to stop. There was no information panel, just the buildings. I walked around and we became separated. Then I heard the rocks crying. Wailing is a better description of what I heard. The wailing was not meant to cause fear, but was the forever going history of fear that existed and thus continues to exist in that place. It was a demand for witnessing. I was stunned and could not think of a response. I went back to the car and was silent. It would be difficult to explain to others about wailing rocks. Those rocks and the voices have stayed with me forever. Later, I would learn that this was the area where massacres and other atrocities were committed by Spanish colonizers. The West thinks history is the past. History is the present, and we can potentially rehear it with each step we take on Earth.
I was born that year, Maria Thereza, in 1979, and not far from those rocks that you heard wailing in the Sonora Desert. I wonder if this is why we are confabulating. We've been witnesses and play roles in this queering of linear history that you have just evoked and that Denise in Serpent Rain does as well. And this querying of history is implicit in the title of your work, The Return of the Lake, a project that not only names another form of thinking about time, but also resists the boundary of the art object. You began your research in 2019 after encountering a disturbing exhibition 2009, sorry, I said 2019, 2009, after encountering a disturbing exhibition at the Museum of Emigration in Asturias, Spain. And you've written that this museum celebrated the outstanding achievements of one Spanish fortune hunter, Íñigo Noriega Lasso, a businessman who emigrated to Mexico in the late 1860s during a time when the Mexican government actively sought out international investments by offering ample fiscal benefits. Noriega Lasso obtained the permit to desiccate Lake Chalco in order to convert it into a major agricultural enterprise. This sounds to me like an early example of moral hazard that Ignacio Valero described to us last confabulation. And rightly so, your rage, Maria Thereza, your digna rabia, has motivated you for years to study this case. The Return of the Lake over these years has taken the form of exhibitions, books, installations, community activism, social media campaigns, and much more. Would you tell us about The Return of the Lake?
Okay, so first we'll look at one image, which will be the pictograph for Hiko. And as you can see, it is an island surrounded by water, fresh water, and mountains. Today, Hiko is no longer an island, nor surrounded by water. Now only 30% of the population has access to drinking water of dubious quality for 2 days a week. Next slide, please. The return of the lake was begun in 2009 in Hiko, which is in the region of Chalco, which is in the state of Mexico. The work is based upon a request of the community of Hiko to tell this history, the taking of the waters of the lake and the community today. I would exhibit it later in Documento 13, and it consists of an installation, which you can see in this image, a book, and the recreation of a chinampa. Next image, please. The region of Chalco had a population of 37,000 before the invasion. Lake Chalco, which you can see on the right side in the lower corner, was part of the Valley of Mexico, which had a population of 2 million before the invasion. Lake Chalco was one of 5 lakes in the basin of Mexico, forming a flexible system to capture excess water from the rain, and together with native engineering techniques, regulate the water system. Until the Spanish invasion, all the lakes in the basins were interconnected and operated as a single system. Next image, please. You're going to see the pre-invasion metropolis of Tenochtitlan, the Mexica Aztec capital, founded in 1325, which became the city of Mexico. And at the time of the Spanish invasion, had between 200,000 to 400,000 residents. To put it in perspective, Paris at the time had 150,000. Careful water management allowed the inhabitants to practice agriculture all year, even in the dry season. Roads built on top of the lake allowed for pedestrian foot traffic. Raw sewage did not contaminate these waters. It was a practice initiated by the Spanish and which plagues the region with disease and horrid smells until today. Next image, please. The indigenous peoples of the area built chinampas, artificial islands considered the most intensive and productive agriculture in Mesoamerica. Chinampas exist since about 1400 BCE. The Chalco region was considered the granary of Tenochtitlan. The chinampas of Chalco and its neighbor Xochimilco produced about 20 million tons of corn annually, which could feed 170,000 people. Agricultural products from Chalco went to the market of Tlatelolco, which had daily up to 60,000 people at the market before colonization. Next image, please. The image you're going to see deals with the invasion that happened because of the waters and what happened. By 1605, the destruction of the indigenous water management system would result in the daily deaths of 2,000 indigenous people just from the community of Xochimilco, which you see on the lower left. Since that time, there has been continuous negation of the indigenous practice of the cyclical use of water. The lakes were drained, rainwater came and flowed out as there was no lake to hold it. The entire area, which was full of water, now suffers from hydraulic tension. Next image, please. Inigo Noriega Lazo from Colombres, Asturias in Spain, bought the island of Hiko on Lake Chalco. This is Lake Chalco and all its chinampas. The lake covered about 38 square miles. He drained it, in that way acquiring more farmland than what he had actually purchased. A total of 23 indigenous pueblos were adversely affected and or destroyed by the desiccation, as well as the local economy. Lake Chalco had been the home to about 10 species of fish and 109 species of birds, of which 5 million arrived annually. Inigo had a personal army of 250 soldiers. This is celebrated in the museum in Colombres. If indigenous peoples resisted, they were beaten, imprisoned, killed, or enslaved. Families were reduced to farms of 0.27 hectares, when 8 hectares are required to sustain lives here in this area minimally. Next image, please. Inigo Noriega forcibly removed and relocated the Chalca indigenous peoples living on the island of Hiko to an area in which they were not given enough land to survive and which floods. Next image, please. After draining its lake, Mexico City began to steal the water from neighboring indigenous communities. In the 80s, 14 pumping stations were built to extract water from under the former Lake Chalco to send to Mexico City. Due to the excessive extraction of water, there is a land subsidence of about 16 inches per year in the area. And that's what you're seeing in that image. That's what land subsidence does. Next image. This formed a depression on which had been Lake Chalco, which allowed for the collection of rainwater. And the lake emerging now is known as Lake Tlahuac-Xico, the names of the two communities that make up the area where the lake is returning. Today, 66 of the 109 species of birds have returned. Next image, please. You will see Leticia Torres Gutierrez, co-founder of the Community Museum, standing on a chinampa. As part of the work, the return of the lake, this chinampa, destroyed by Enigo, was recreated based on consultation with local community, some of whom are determined to see the lake return. This image is Raimundo Martinez. His grandparents were expelled from their traditional lands by Enigo Noriega Lazo. They were forced to live in what is known as Xico Nuevo, New Xico. In July 2012, for the first time in the area, there was a tremor whose epicenter was Xico Nuevo. The cause is the excessive extraction of water from the aquifer. The water was taken and the earth reacts.
What fascinates me about Maria Thereza's work, in particular the return of the lake, is its commitment not to let what has happened, a robot of Lake Chalco, that theft, to disappear in the abstract flow of linear time. Because it is a measure of value, time is crucial for contending ethically and economically with the reverberations of this never-ending act, the colonial theft. So to situate my point here, let's watch a clip from Four Waters' Deep Implicancy, please. The very idea that that which should be cherished, protected, is that which has value, right? Because it is distinct somehow. It is exceptional in some sense. It is better than everything else. So some things can be destroyed, but that entity that embodies what's valued is the one that has protected. So the notion of value will always bring about that, because it's always about some kind of measure, some kind of hierarchy, some kind, is it both the qualitative and quantitative aspects of our ethical program, they have to be displaced.
me rare venio ai doyen manjuguro ngaji duntan mangin rare em lagi libu puta ore wondal tangan min kujan ngai rala jowi ga real wa rumur mureno dakar wa rumur
I have chosen this clip for 3 reasons. First, because it recalls the connection between abstraction and total violence, the latter being a crucial aspect of colonialism, as we know, genocide, the killing that allowed the access to indigenous land and waters, that allows extraction. Second, because it speaks of the ethical significance of abstractions, the equations, concepts, categories, while now with the pandemic, the charts, lines, maps, and graphs that organize our thinking and our existence with many consequences. In particular, this abstraction of the actual living human person that seems to numb us to so much avoidable death and destruction. And that leads to the third reason that connects both, which is value in its ethical and economic sense. Value implies a question which is posed as measurement and comparison. How much will it cost? But I mean, considerations of value involve weighing, comparing, evaluating. They imply a decision between it and what it will cost. The ethical cost of the nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands, war or lives, human and more than human. And of colonialism, well, it's defining economic practice, extraction is still costing lives, millions and millions. Maria Thereza's work reminds us that in capitalism, the ethical and economic are inseparable, both implying a gesture of measuring, valuing, setting one thing against another, making a choice, a decision which seems to have remained the same across modern history. The population, here including the lands and waters and the more than humans sharing these with us, or the economy, however it happens to be organized in a given moment, place.
Denise, I first encountered your multidisciplinary thinking during a session of Sensing Salon, a studio practice that you and Valentina Desideri have elaborated that expands the image of art beyond objects, events, and discourse to include healing arts. By experimenting with different tools for reading, such as tarot and astrology, and tools for healing, such as Reiki and political therapy, the Sensing Salon fosters a form of sociality that attends to our deeply implicated existence and dismantles or attempts to dismantle lethal abstraction. Can you elaborate on this practice as you talk us through the ways in which The Return of the Lake and art in general speculates away from abstraction and extraction and into what you've termed poetics?
Okay, let me preface it by commenting more on abstraction and extraction, but can we play the 2 clips from Serpent Rain, please? So if we take the fossil as a model for our categories, for our concept, a completely different notion of time could become available, because the living thing that was fossilized, the content, the material, its matter, now is part of the rock itself, or part of the surroundings themselves. So even though the fossil is an inscription of time, is a graphing of something that happened in the past, it is also a reminder that that which has happened has not gone away. So in the same way we think of slavery as something that happened in the past, it did happen in the past. But then at the same time, the products of slave labor, they remain in our lives, in our species. So back to extraction and abstraction. So extraction, as we know, provides the raw materials necessary for building the infrastructure of capital. And abstraction composes the infrastructure of modern thinking. Think of how linearity is central to both extraction and abstraction. The spatial line that divides between there, where extraction takes place, and there, where wealth accumulates. The temporal line, the one that flows in one direction, that sustains our views of progress and development. Colonialism and capitalism are indistinguishable when one attends to how the spatial line is mapped onto the temporal line. And what has been occasioned by extraction is explained in racial cultural terms as expression of a mental, intellectual, moral incapacity for abstraction, which is considered a sign of development. So for this reason, I think that to understand and undo how the colonial, capital, and racial cultural work together, we need to think otherwise. Both poetical readings and the sensing salon are practices that experiment with thinking, making sense without the infrastructure of modern thought. The tools Valentina and I use allow for imaging time as something other than a flow in one direction. And along with that, to consider change without assuming separation. So you know that famous passage from Heraclitus, the comment on the river, that even though it changes, the water flows, it is the same river. The point is how to think of a river and without even consider asking whether or not it is the same river or even the same water. Anyway, this is a long preface to your question, Camila, which is about also whether or not, and if so, how there is something in art, about art, that already breaks through this presumed separability or the assumption that we cannot think about the multiplicity, about all that happens, all that exists without dividing up, comparing, evaluating. I think we can and must. So with Valentina, we experiment with thinking non-linearly, sense making without separability, without the infrastructure of modern European thought, without abstraction, determination, and decision. Thinking with the elements, thinking with the water, but not as flow or in terms of quantity, but thinking of with water as something that it is in the composition of things, of most things. Most of the planet, 71%, most of our body, 60% of the human body is water. And more importantly, even thinking water also as a presentation of matter, and along with it, thinking with all the presentations of matter as indicated by the other elements, earth, air, fire, that is thinking of difference in matter in terms of phase transition from solid to gas, plasma, to liquid plasma. I think if we do that, then it's possible to describe what exists and what happens without the need for determination and without privileging development.
Listening to you, what comes up for me, and I have a question for you, Maria Thereza, about how you deal with these phase transitions of water. In The Return of the Lake, many times you use numbers and maps to superimpose facts that allow for the evidence that pre-invasion there was a complex and sophisticated aquaculture in Lake Chalco and the Chico region. So by using this aesthetics of numbers and facts, you reinforce the material reality of that existing lake basin and its possible return. However, there is that complication of the determination and of categories of quantity and value. Could you talk to us about those measurements and how you deal with them in your artistic methodology?
First, there is the problem that colonialism continues to strive for, as Denise says, the obliteration of the indigenous. So one way that occurs is by constantly denying the actual numbers of people that existed in the Americas before the invasion. So recently, a curator and his colleague, a historian anthropologist in Brazil, said that there were 1 million indigenous people in Brazil before the invasion. As today, there are almost 1 million indigenous people, seems colonization was not so bad in Brazil, right? 1 million equals 1 million. These numbers are used against indigenous peoples. The actual general consensus at the moment, the conservative general consensus, is that there are more than 15 million people. In another decade, that consensus will change to a higher figure. In Brazil, racism infects the brain continuously. In an interview, Buzan, a Hunikuni activist, speaks about two important Hunikuni historians, Huruan Buzan and Siriane. The translator of the interview did not translate this. An indigenous person in Brazil cannot be a historian, cannot be a philosopher or a scientist. So I cite numbers as an act of resistance, the same with indigenous technologies. So in this image, we have again the Tenochtitlan. And in the 1400s, Nezahualcóyotl, he was a poet and a ruler of Texcoco near Tenochtitlan. We don't have enough time for me to read one of his poems, but I suggest that you do. Built a dike to help stop the flooding of the city. This dike divided the central lake into two, making one lake of sweet water and one of salty water. During the dry season, the waters of Chalco and Xochimilco flowed into the lake of Texcoco. You can't see Xochimilco and Chalco because they're off the image. They would be on the extreme lower right. And in the rainy season, these gates closed to prevent the salt waters of Texcoco from mixing with those of the freshwater lakes, thus allowing the water to the south to become more consolidated as freshwater lakes, a long thinking process. Additional dikes were constructed to then separate Xochimilco and Chalco, which had been a single lake, and assisted also in flood control. Indigenous engineers monitored water levels for the lake so that they would not flood or dry out, as this would cause bad odors. Can we please see the next image? So the way you construct a chinampa, we had seen images of the floating island before, is you make a basket and then you scoop out the earth from the lake bed, you put it on top with some rocks, and then you put some trees that give shade, such as willows. And the willows will send out their roots to the bottom of the lake and attach themselves there. Then you plant your maize, your beans, and your squash, and your chili peppers. And because it's attached to the lake, you don't have to go looking for it. These chinampas were about 600, 300 feet long. And this was the most productive system of agriculture in Mesoamerica. And yet, today, it continues to be deliberately destroyed. That chinampa that you saw recreated was later destroyed. I think a year or two later, it was destroyed.
It's interesting. So I think Maria Thereza's use of numbers and abstraction, I mean, that abstraction is not necessarily a servant of destruction. So we know that the equivalence between matter and energy presented by Einstein, it materialized in the bombs tested in the Marshall Islands. But, well, that can be hijacked and repurposed too. But in any case, I think it is what I'm trying to get at. So I think it's about no, not so much the abstraction, but the image of existence that accompanies thinking. Thinking without separability, for instance, if we image change as phase transition, the same matter changing into solid, liquid, gas, plasma, and transduction, shifting from one form of energy into another, like the microphone transforming electrical waves into sound waves. I mean, if we think change along those lines, it's possible to think that what has been extracted has not disappeared in consumption. It is possible to consider both at the same time that yes, the water of Lake Chalco has been extracted, but the Rico community's claim to that water is not only a claim to possession, which is that economic logical value I was mentioning before. Theirs, as indigenous ontologists, epistemologists already say, is an ancestral claim. They are the water, bodies composed by water, and also by everything that grew in that community because of the lake's water, the plants, the fishes, the birds. That is in the sense that their ancestors' bodies were composed by what grew because of the water. So when the water was extracted, parts of them were taken elsewhere. That is their claim that cannot be measured because it is everything. That means that we must think two things at the same time. First, extraction and total violence that enabled it, the ongoing theft, economic dispossession, and then also what I call redecomposition, the fact that the water remains physically as their bodies, the trees and the other things that exist in Rico because the lake has been there, that water has been there. Anyway, what I'm saying is that we can think that the wealth that has been accumulated by the descendants of the occupiers, of the settlers of these lands, the wealth that was sent back to Europe in the form of objects, but also of raw materials, the raw materials that entered the initial accumulation of capital as industrial capital, that stolen wealth has been transformed in so many ways. It's also composed of that water, Lake Chalco's. What has been extracted remains transduced into money and now into these virtual financial objects that prevail in global capital. So if we take both into account then that if we can think of the return of the lake in distinct ethical-political terms, to think that it's not the return of a possession, it is the return of a constitutive part of the community, like the return of a limb, and that can't be monetized. It is also because the wealth yielded by what was extracted enters in the composition of what exists, not only in Europe, but everywhere. Then the return is also homecoming of sorts. It is the actualization of the deep implicancy that it's, that exists. So it cannot be monetized, it cannot be calculated, it cannot be resolved as loss or a kind of gain. I think what I'm trying to say is, to get at, is that thinking without separations of linearity and ways of creating meaning, the ways of creating meaning it imposes and permits can give us another appreciation of indigenous people's call for decolonization and Black folks' demand for reparations. What has been demanded is a restoration of something that it's missing but has never completely left, and which has also made them us part of what exists elsewhere, everywhere on this planet. And I think this calls for a radical shift in thinking, a call I find that artistic practice is more equipped to mediate because, well, its craft cannot but attend to the imagination.
Maria Thereza, along those lines, you're in a new phase of the return of the lake. your collaborators from the Valle de Xico Community Museum, who are committed to reclaiming pre-invasion indigenous artifacts and promoting the cultural activities. That museum was founded in 1996, if I'm correct, and in February of 2019, it was closed after having been reopened prior to some remodeling that was much needed. So this community that you work with and that you have constantly been in communication with has recently requested for more supportive action to call upon the illegal act of being closed by, I believe it's by the municipal government, even though they belong to their own federal lands. You may tell us more about this, but why I'm asking you to relay some of this information to us is because they have a very particular demand now, which I think relates to what Denise was talking about, and the return and the many ways in which what was taken transforms. And there's a project that you call El Son del Pueblo, which deals with that, and with an open call for peoples around the world to attempt forms of return that will make visible what needs to be recognized from the Xico Museum.
First, the word Xico means navel. And this in itself acknowledges connections far greater than what we can normally see. And central Mexico might seem far from us, but we know all water is water. And we know that our knowledge and the perception of the world is part of these connections. And the people of Xico understand that very well. I'm living in Europe since 2000, and so far I have heard no stone wail. So many millions chose to go to the Americas to escape the histories. I came to Europe to escape the Americas. But 2 years ago, I was visiting the museum known as the Villa Pignatelli in Naples, and I noticed the name Pignatelli Cortez. I thought it could not be Cortez of the invasion of Mexico Cortez. Surely there must be another Cortez, but it was. So history came tumbling on my escape plans. It was in the early 1600s that a fifth generation descendant of Cortez married a Pignatelli from Naples. And from then on until the mid 20th century, the wealth of Cortez, taken from the continual usurpation of indigenous lands, bodies, and resources, would flow into Naples. I was invited to make an artist book, which you see the image of here, by the organization Zerintia in Rome, and decided it would be called Thieves and Murderers in Naples, a brief history on families, colonization, immense wealth, land theft, and the Valle de Xico Community Museum. You see the villa on the left and the building that the museum is housed in the right. It's not in all of that building, just a part of it. In the book, I juxtaposed the histories of the Pignatelli with that of Xico and its community museum. And I request that the Villa Pignatelli invite annually 2 community members from Xico to a residency in the villa in order to have access to the Pignatelli Cortez archives, which contains thousands of original documents of the wealth extracted from indigenous communities, among others Xico, whose land and people were at one time owned by Cortez and his descendants. I will make a new artwork after spending time in these archives myself, if I can find some funding at this time. The second request I make is to the heir apparent, who is working in her aunt's gallery in Madrid and Mexico City, asking her to desist from the title, Marquess of the Valley of Oaxaca. Next image, please. I first met Género Amaro Altamirano, who I think is in the audience tonight, and who is the co-founder of the chronicler of the Valle de Xico Community Museum in 2009. He is the one in the center. The museum was an initiative of the local community to actively defend their indigenous culture without financial support from the government. But under threats and intimidation, the community museum has been able to save nearly 5,000 pre-invasion artifacts from oblivion or destruction, as there is no other institution in the city interested in protecting this cultural heritage. Since its founding in 1996, there has been continuous acts of aggression and violence from the local government against the community museum, including an attempt to arrest its founder, Género, in 2010. Next image, please. These artifacts that you'll see were donated to the museum by local community members who find them in the surrounding area. It is these people of the community who have until now resisted the elimination of the indigenous social and cultural heritage, without which we would be, as Jimmy Durham says, only a pathetic lover of Europe. Next image, please. You will see Onésimo Ventura Martinez. He lives in Jico and has a few cattle, which he takes all around looking for grass to feed them. He has found some of the most important artifacts of the museums since he's always looking down at the earth. Next image. This is Yurici Amaro Torres. She is a nurse and an active member along with her daughter. Next image, please. Last year in 2019, with no reason given, the community museum was closed in an act that the community considers illegal. The community protests. Tenorio, the mayor at the time, the artifacts are not yours, this banner says. They are of the people. For over a year, the community has no access to their cultural artifacts. Teens and a group of young artists no longer have a place to meet and work and are vulnerable in this highly violent drug cartel area. The water was taken, the lands were taken, attempts made to destroy language and culture, and now the youth of Jico are deliberately placed in danger. The museum has requested supportive actions in order to convince the municipal authorities to reopen their museum. I responded by making the campaign Son del Pueblo, of the people, which invites contributors to make a ceramic work. You see mine that I made is back there. That is Huehue Teotl, the deity of fire. So if you could make a ceramic work inspired by one of the works in the museum's collection, you can see my website, mariatherezaalves.org, for more information. If you can send an image of the work, it doesn't need to be fired in the kiln, and your name and your place of residency to my email, studio@mariatherezaalves.org. The images will be posted on the community's museum's website and in my website, as well in the Instagram, #son_del_pueblo. This is an image, the next image will be an image of the first two contributors. That is Kiesda Pasipanodia from Toronto and Hamza Badran in Basel. The campaign needs to be widespread enough so that municipal authorities will find it in their interest to reopen the museum. We need help in expanding this campaign to a much wider audience. If there is anyone there that can help us, please contact me. Thank you.
I think this invitation of yours, Maria Thereza, is the perfect place to turn to those of you who are listening, who are feeling, and who have questions. I've been keeping track of questions and comments, and I think we can get to a couple of them. Maybe just to continue where you left off, Maria Thereza, there's a question here from Irene Vicente, who's in Madrid, who was asking about the specificity of your artistic research, or the specificity of artistic research in projects such as The Return of the Lake. And wondering not only how you select or come across your themes, which I think you did refer to, but how your methodology develops. I believe this is what was happening and is happening in Son del Pueblo. You're muted, Maria Thereza.
The methodology happens as a result of the work and the process of the work. So sometimes I learn something from another project that I can begin to use in the new project, but then have to do other things to respond to the specific situations there. And it is usually the community that helps me become more intelligent in how to deal with the next process and the next step and the next step. And so the community invites me to do more work around the illegal closure of the museum. And I then have to think, I first started out with performance. That worked well for a little bit. There was some press coverage. First time there was national press coverage for the closure of the museum in Mexico was because of a performance I did in Belgium at an opening in a group show. But then it stopped happening. And then I was like, during lockdown, I was like, what more can I do? What more? And then came the idea of working with the collection and learning how to make ceramic works, which was the first time. And I said, instead of looking towards Europe, I will look at the collection and start learning how to make ceramics from the pieces that were there. And so I'm always trying to respond to the specificity of the requests from different people and communities.
I think this response also leads to some of the other questions, but also has me thinking about the fact that we are almost at the 2-year mark of the anniversary of the burning of the museum in Sao Paulo, in Rio, right? And which museums can stay open and which ones are closed, and the different policies and politics of the different nations regarding the care and custodianship of these constantly transforming bodies. And with that, there's a question from Magdalena Llantus, who's in Ecuador, and it's both to Denise and Maria Thereza. And she recognizes that you're both considering different ways of thinking about time and return, and asks how one who has been educated in a Western culture begins to understand these other ways of perceiving time and practices these phase transitions of return.
That's it. I can start. Well, as somebody who is being educated in the Western culture, I can appreciate the question, but also one of the things Valentina and I decided to do in our practice, poetical readings and stance and so on, is to use precisely some tools, some Western tools that everybody knows about. Maybe most don't like to say they do, which actually do not reproduce this, what has become the dominant logic of linearity and that particular kind of abstraction. So we use astrology, tarot, and herbs and other practices. And we know that there are other ways in which we describe things, we think about what happens, that it doesn't, those ways don't follow the logic. I think it's not so much a matter of not knowing, but it's a matter of value. Things that we know that are, associated with the feminine, women, for instance, which are devalued, like the intuition. So I think it's more a shift. We need a shift along those lines, like things that we devalue because they are not rational enough. If we attend to them, we can find that they actually hold that which we are looking for.
There's a question here that asks for more on that. So I'll read it out. It's from Monica Amor. And she says, so much should not be monetized. And we certainly should welcome deviations from a certain normative, authoritative, rational, modern European thought. But she says that art is a modern European concept, and wonders how we should acknowledge that paradox as the foundation of this alternative aesthetical project.
That's a nice distinction. I have been thinking about it actually after some quick conversation with Fred Moten about the distinction between art and statics and the ways in which, but I have been thinking more about it in terms of how do we separate art from aesthetics, and then how we separate aesthetics, which has to do with the senses, from the Kantian formulation of aesthetics, which places it in the mind and in some relationship between the understanding and the imagination. I think we can explore that. I'll let Maria Thereza say more about it.
I find that question, how do I say this? Problematic, right? Because we're always doing performances. We're thinking of a beloved and making an object as a gift for the beloved throughout thousands and thousands of years. And somebody might have said that's art, and somebody might not have said that's art. And then, but you're thinking of your beloved and you make this object, and it's an amazing object. And whatever century it is that we look at it, we find it very interesting and aesthetically interesting. And then we might now define it as art. So I would rather we spend our energies developing other situations with art than going back into this, is this art, is this not art, is this craft, is this not craft? This is a discussion a friend of mine who lives in Toronto, he was from Mexico, he stopped by my house a bit there when I would live on and off, and he would come and talk about, is craft art, is ceramics art? And it was a very tortured discussion for him. And he could have spent his life and his creativity in a much more interesting ways. And our discussions could have been about other things also.
I think we have time for one more question. And there's one here from Vivian Zaherl, and is asking about, or wants to know a little bit more of this relationship between the museums that you talked of, Maria Thereza, and of desisting from the name. And the question is about the legacy of naming, and if that is significant in some way in redressing these debts that we've been referring to in El Robo. And adds a last question to that, mostly directed to Denise, which is, if you would consider that in terms of the ancestral logic of indigenous claims, rather than rational economy, if indebtedness is also feeds into this naming, question of naming and resisting names or recognition from different museums.
So there was something that Denise was saying earlier about the transformed wealth of the exploitation of Mexico and of Lake Chalco being present in Naples as part of Lake Chalco. And I think that's a very strong image, because now if I walk in Naples, that image will be coming to me. So I think, for example, there were 92 huge towns and regions that were part of the Marquisate of Cortes. And in my book, they're written at the bottom throughout the whole book, all of the names of these places. And maybe we could footnote the name of the museum and have all the 92 towns and places that were the property that made this wealth possible to purchase this. And then always have, like, there are other properties that were purchased, huge amounts of properties that were purchased with this wealth. And maybe that could also be part of the name from now on, so that they can't just say the Pignatelli Villa on the street of so-and-so. They have to say the Pignatelli Villa purchased with the wealth extracted from, 92 names of very specific places. I don't know. This is a new way to think about that Denise has given me. So I will have to ponder a bit more. Thank you.
Yes, probably it is along those lines, but I think we had a conversation about, the three of us, about, for instance, not only the acknowledgement, but also the access, right? However we define access to what has become possible because of a Robo, right? Because of the theft. I think naming, changing name, giving up name, it's not enough. Even returning objects is not enough, right? Because of what happened since the objects were stolen, and because of what's justified by the study of the objects. So I think it cannot be monetized, so it's not a matter of transforming what the demand into some numbers, but it is a matter of changing the ways in which museums and universities and everything basically functions, so as access is guaranteed to those because of the dispossession of whom made it possible. And I think there are other ways that we will figure out if we spend time thinking along those lines. So there is one comment that I want to respond to, if I can. Can I, Camila? Is it okay?
Yes.
It's a comment about abstraction. I forgot, it's gone up now in the chat. But it's about the ways in which, it's about the critique of abstraction and how the right has hijacked the critique of abstraction and science. And I just want to say a couple of things. One, that, as I said before, and I think Maria Thereza's work is so much, reminds us of that abstraction is not necessarily a bad thing, that the numbers are not bad things. But the second thing is that as we mention the numbers and look at the charts and the maps, we need to ask the question, right? Who is being allowed to be killed and who is allowed to be let die because of that abstraction, right? So we have to bring it to the ethical terrain, and that I think separates us from the Trump people who are just concerned with their, freedom and right to carry arms and whatever else they're interested in. Anyway, that's all I want to say. That is an ethical element that goes with it. It's not, and you can see the difference if you pay attention to it.
Gracias, Denise, for that. Yes, I want to end on that, on the ethical domain that we are all, I think, we are all here present trying to inhabit. And on that note, thank the Instituto Cisneros for hosting and for caring for this confabulation, and thank Denise and Maria Thereza for sharing their ideas, their research with all of us, and thank everybody who is behind the scenes, the MoMA AV team, because this confabulation and these conversations are part of this Cumbre Aconcagua project, which hopes to instill these questions of the ethical domain of our own bodies in territories in relation to the waters that move within and without us, in spaces of art institutions and museums. And it's not enough. As Denise was saying, the return doesn't have a day by which it will be achieved, but it's a process that we're all in right now, confabulating juntas. Así que muchas gracias. Thank you to everyone. Please, I hope in the chat you saw Son del Pueblo, more information about it, if you'd like to respond to the request by the Chico Museum. If not, you can connect to Maria Thereza's website. And the next confabulation is on the 9th of September. That one will be in Spanish. Thank you to those of you who thought this one was going to be in Spanish and who stuck through it. Or if you didn't, this will be also uploaded with Spanish subtitles. We're trying to be as bilingual as we can over the coming weeks. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you, Camila, for the invitation. Thank you, Maria Thereza and Cisneros Institute.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Valle de Jico Community Museum. Gracias.
Gracias.